Hi, Josh. So I am so excited to have you on here on the Mood Lab podcast. And I would love if you could introduce yourself, and you can already go into introducing Them Before Us, the company or nonprofit rather, that you're working for, and a little bit what it's about, and maybe even why you actually are involving yourself into this nonprofit and why you care about the issues that you're covering. I think that would be a very nice intro.
Perfect. Well, Josh Wood, I'm the executive director for Them Before Us. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, over here in the United States. And I got into this work with Them Before Us. And if you're not familiar, we are a global movement defending a child's right to their mother and father. That's what we do. So all issues of marriage and family, we seek to represent the child and to make sure that they have a relationship with their mother and father, and that's protected. And so I got into this work, quite frankly, because I have a background in working for nonprofits and working in the community and helping people in a variety of different life situations. And over again throughout my time, I kept running into people who were downstream. So they were feeling the effects of a broken down family, people who had lost connections with their mother or lost connections with their father. And children who lose those connections often have a lot of trouble later in life. They, will often find themselves in trouble with the law, or they'll have trouble getting through school and doing well. They'll have trouble finding a job, and that puts them in poverty. And so as I was working in all of those different situations, I thought, wouldn't it be nice to go back and focus on the one issue that is such a determinant for success, and that is how a child being raised by their mother and father. So that's what I did. I found Katie. I was a donor at first, just someone who gave money to her. Then I was a volunteer. And over time, I said, man, I think this is worth putting a lot of time into. I think this is such a critical, important issue for the entire world. Families, strong families specifically, are such an important issue for kids.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's such a cool story. I mean, this world is a bit crazy in the time that we're living in, and I mean, I don't really have much experience with families. I mean, I guess I grew up in a very sheltered environment in a way of everything was still quite normal. I was like in a small town, and it was like very traditional roles still around me. So there was a lot of that. But what I definitely noticed is that a lot of people in my age group even have a lot of issues because of their families being broken. So like, I don't think I actually know many people who have a mother and a father who is still married, which is very interesting to me. This seems to be something that has started in the generation of, I guess, like my parents' generation, maybe. The generation of my grandparents, actually, I know that so many of those grandparents, so like 2 generations ago, they still are together now, and they just grew up together. And I think there is a huge difference nowadays. And now in my generation, people are not even getting married, not even finding themselves with each other. And then we have all the issues that you also concern yourself with, people having obviously sex outside of marriage. So there are a lot of children born into something that is not even a construct of a family. So there's a lot of that going on, which comes with a lot of issues, I would say. And that is very palpable, and you can really notice that in the culture and the society that we're living in. I would just be very interested first to hear about what is actually a pro-child agenda, and that is what obviously Them Before Us is concerned about. What is the mission, and what are some of the things that are included in that, just in more detail? And what does it mean to actually put the child before, I guess, the parents and before us?
You mentioned that the previous generation looks different than ours, especially as it relates to marriage. I think that there's probably a lesson there that we still today are living off of, in some ways, an inheritance from those generations, and the sacrifices they made, the the families they formed, the economies they produced. And I think we just have to be careful that we're choosing to do this very differently than previous generations. The even marriage rates, the amount of children we're having, the amount of children we're having within marriage, all those things since 1970 look very different than previous generations. And I'm not sure that we totally know what the long term outlook of that is going to be. And what we
Mm.
do know doesn't look great. I think
Yeah.
what we try to conserve here is an ethic that tries to look at all of these issues and ask one really simple question: what would be best for the child in this situation? And then ask who's being prioritized. Is it an adult desire, or is it a child's right, or a child's connection or relationship? And so you can think about this in a lot of different situations, including, I think, the divorce epidemic is a really good place to start. The vast majority of divorces, if you're even getting married in the first place, so that's like the first hurdle to jump, is to say, marriage is an institution between two people that society has always needed because it governs child rearing and child creation. It makes sure that if sex is being had, a child will be born to two people who are kind of contractually obligated to each other to protect each other and then to provide for each other and the child. The alternative is the child isn't provided for, the child ends up in poverty, and all of us collectively as a community have to care for the child. We have to care for them in school, we have to care for them with healthcare, we have to care for them with food, all of these things where the public will now have to support.
Yeah.
The biggest way that we've counteracted that is by having families. In families, that you're going to have the most efficient form of child rearing too. The mom and dad know so much better what a child needs, even down to a minuscule monetary level. The parents know way better what the kids need. And so not only do we need marriage, but then when people do get married and they follow the correct sequence and they have kids after they're married, well, then we have to keep people together. And this epidemic of divorce, which the vast majority occur, it's not abuse or neglect, it's low conflict, it's two people who aren't working out their differences, fueled by a culture that tells them you can just swap spouses, just trade them out,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. And that's a detrimental worldview for a child, because
Yeah.
the stability that marriage provides for kids, when that's torn apart, it's very hard on the child. You don't
Yeah.
it can be hard to have conflict in a marriage, but divorce doesn't take the conflict away. It takes that very hard thing and it breaks it into little pieces and gives each member of the family a piece to carry with them. And
Yeah.
so in that situation, we ask, you know, are you doing this for you or for the child? Because we get so many people who say, I'm doing this for the kids. I need to be happy so the kids can be happy. And you know what? So often it's an adult decision because they're unhappy, and then they choose to make everyone unhappy through divorce. Maybe a little bit less so, but everyone's going to carry a piece. And then they go remarry, and now the
Yeah.
child is going between two houses. The child is splitting Christmases. The parents aren't. The parents are in one house the whole time. But the child is going all the way around, having to adapt to all sorts of new situations, a lot of uncertainty and a lot of instability. And
Yeah.
again, that's where we would go back and say, in these decisions, who's being prioritized here? You're
Yeah.
uncomfortable, you're unhappy, but you're forcing the child now to take on that burden so that you can
Yeah.
get out of this situation.
And I think statistically, we even know that people are literally just carrying their issues with them into the next marriage. So, like, I mean, I've heard this countless of times, one person going from one marriage to the next marriage, or even just one relationship to the next one, and they seem to bring the same issues with them. And so oftentimes that's not even the solution. We have had this solution by society that, I mean, because it's also individualist, right? So it's just about you and how you're feeling and how you're doing. And if you don't like it, move on. We do this with everything, right? With jobs, with houses, with everything in life, really. It's if you don't like it, you don't need to like it, just move on, and you don't need to adapt. And when I think again back to my grandparents, actually, I always have admired, and I still admire that my grandparents would always say they never thought it would be a choice to actually look at someone else or choose someone else, because they had chosen each other and they just made it work. And it's not that they were miserable because of that. They went through those phases where they probably struggled with each other sometimes and they had issues, etc., like everybody does. But we also know that the longer you are with someone, the more you would actually just grow together and actually become one team. That's way more valuable than trying to just seek out a new person, because you have to go through the whole same process with every one of those people, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's the takeaway is that we need as society to be very pro marriage. We need to be pro child rearing. I think that culture doesn't do enough of that. I think that societies that value marriage, that value pregnancy, that value children, that make space for children, those are the types of cultures that are going to thrive in the next, 50 to 100 years. And I see worrying signs within our American culture that looking down on people that are choosing to start families, that it's weird to have 4 kids, that it's like that is a very negative and detrimental worldview. And that, people who choose to stick it out, or people who say things like, I made a covenant before God and I need to stick into this marriage and we need to figure it out, that's old fashioned or outdated. I'd say again, we have to be careful what we're denigrating, because in my estimation, we're benefiting from generations of people who lived according to those values. And we're benefiting today from them while still making completely different choices and denigrating, without knowing it, exactly what got us the prosperity that we have right now.
Yeah. That is so true. I have seen so many reels on Instagram, and it's actually something that I've seen a lot of German, let's say, influencers, etc., doing. These women, and it's just a representation, obviously, what is happening societally and what is in the heads of especially also women, because I feel like a lot of these things actually are part of what women are communicating, and it's not even on the men's side. There's so much about my kid can be anything and become anything, but never ask me to become a stay-at-home mom. Never do this to me. We fought for the rights for you to go to work and to do all of the things, etc. And there's such a big motion around you need to work. I mean, we had this whole boss babe, girl boss culture happening. It's still going on, but it has kind of there's some different narratives now. It feels like there's also a movement against it now, which is great to see, but there's so much around that. So it's almost like people are, and you said that just now, with people aren't excited about a family getting 4 children or even 6 or whatever. They're like, oh, this is so odd, right? But if you have a family of 4 children, you probably need to have a lot of money to pay for people to help you out with all those kids, or you need a mom who stays at home. I think it's just something that societally we've been moving so far away from accepting that and actually thinking that this is something really beautiful, because I personally think that the job of a mother is something so beautiful. So I'm just wondering, like, what are some of the things that you are communicating around that as them before us, maybe to like foster a thinking again that is pro family, that is pro raising children, as pro maybe even like giving a bit of a feeling again that creating a more traditional family, how it has been in the past and how it has worked really well because it has given us what we have today, to put that in a position again where it is more attractive, I would say. Are there any things that you communicate in that sense, or that you put out there to help with that?
Well, I think one thing is, realizing that corporations aren't our friends in this regard, that so many of them are, will often shell out thousands of dollars to allow a woman to go get an abortion, to help with her travel costs, to help with her, give her time off. But those same corporations often do not have generous maternity leave policies. And so it's even just pointing out that, like, wait a second, the boss kind of phase, this corporation does not care about you. They are not your family. They will not be here for you. They will literally pay you money to end the life of your child before they would give you more money to spend time with your child who is very much alive. I that hypocrisy, I think, is a great place to start, and
Hmm.
realizing that there are certain things that are transcendent and more important than money, work, jobs, and careers. And that is the people closest to you, your connected community, and your family. And we need to break this spell that, like, the highest good is some sort of career achievement. Now, on the flip side, we also, as citizens, have to be working toward an economy that does allow for people to have alternative, arrangements other than the two parents working,
Yeah.
and putting a kid in childcare. If wages aren't good and childcare is incredibly expensive, and people feel compelled to put their kid in private school, like if we have lots of expenses and everything is expensive and wages aren't up, well, then people do feel trapped. Like, well, what can I
Yeah.
do other than both of us working? So I do think we got to make that's another way to be more pro child and pro family, is having generous maternity leave policies. We have an HR guidance document on our website. You can go to thembeforeus.com and click resources. You can find that, but it talks about to corporations about how to be more pro family, how to incentivize families that want to foster or adopt, how to be generous when parents are going through bereavement, how to be generous when parents are having a child and they need to stay home to bond with the kid. Like, there's
Yeah.
all of those things that I think all will contribute, while also pushing, our elected officials to encourage economies that will create better wages, so that a one family income and household like our grandparents enjoyed is possible. But
Yeah.
right now, a lot of families don't feel like it's possible, and so they got to go, find ways to make it work that aren't
Yeah.
always so pro child.
That's such a huge thing because here in Portugal, the prices are rising so much of housing that the one household income with the wages that you would get in Portugal as like a person who works for a Portuguese company, they would basically earn as much as an apartment costs. So you basically have no other choice in having two incomes to survive in a way. Otherwise, you have to move in with other people, which as a family you don't really do, right? So when you come together, you are required to have two incomes, except if you find work outside of Portugal and then have an income from another European city or a company that is based somewhere else where you earn more money. Otherwise, you're kind of screwed, which is very bad. So here you can clearly see that the state needs to do something so that people can afford housing again, and that model of only one person working, for example, would actually work out. We see that. I mean, I also know that from Germany, the further out of a big city you live, obviously the more affordable it gets. But well, if you grew up in a big city and you kind of want to stay there because it's the place that you always been in, right? So sometimes people have reasons of why they're staying there. It's not just because it's nicer or whatsoever. It's also they just always have been there and they don't really want to move out of the big city because they feel comfortable and love it there and have their friends there. But then they also are in situations where housing is becoming so expensive that just one of their incomes wouldn't be enough. So I think that's a very great point that you made there, that this whole thing needs to start basically at the level of companies, at the level of entire states and politics, really. And how is the taxation going and all of those things, right? They all play into the fact, can a family actually afford to raise children and how many can they actually afford to raise? And then I guess part of it still is though like mindset as well, because people have become so accustomed to just thinking that they need a lot of money to cover a lot of like personal preferences as well. I think that's also how we grew up. I do think there's different things that come together there as well. Yeah.
Well, I think that we can also, as in if you are in a position of owning a business or leading a team, you can also find ways to utilize remote work, different time zones, to encourage giving flexibility to parents, so that they can share the childcare load with their spouse, or working off hours. I mean, there's some things like that too that, okay, if we
Yeah.
can't, if we're not at a place where, we're going to be able to bring housing costs down, if we're not in a place where our wages are going to rise immensely, okay,
Yeah.
well then what is within our control? And that's where I think we can begin to think, a little creatively and say, okay, well then, if the father on my team needs to go to soccer practice, or needs to pick up from school at 2 or 3 p.m., well then, is it really that big a deal to move our meetings or to protect that hour for them so they don't have to do that, if that allows them to continue to pursue those family goals while also working, which they may be passionate about as well. As I'm a good example. I love the work that I do, and I think it helps a lot of people, and I want to be able to continue doing it, but I also want to have a role in my children's life. And so
Yeah.
I'm lucky that our workplace is very flexible and promotes that and allows me to go do pickups for kids, and at the carpool line, but also be present at practice. But I also am able to have time to do my work because of the way we schedule our meetings. So it's in that vein that you can be creative.
Yeah.
And it's that flexibility and encouragement where you're not shaming the parent, you're not making them feel bad for doing drop off, you're actually celebrating the ability to move a meeting so they can have that. It's that kind of thing that really does begin to pile up and create a pro family, pro child culture. And I have a feeling if more of our corporations did that wherever possible, boy, I
Yeah.
think we would see more people being willing to add, children to their families.
Yeah, that's so good. I think then in the end, what you just said is you need to have that focus within a company and within our culture so that we can make those things work. And then even if the environment for it is not ideal, you can still kind of shift things so that it is possible to raise children and be more involved in their lives as well. I guess that is such a good point. Yeah. I have another question that, because for me personally, I mean, I don't have children yet, and still something that I always think about is how scary it is to put a child into a school system, because I feel like the main narrative right now is very different from the traditional narrative that I personally would want to foster in the family that I would want to grow. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Are there any, things that you are, as like information that you're providing families with? What are you going the whole way of like everybody probably is better off homeschooling their children? Yeah, what is your take on that, and what can we do? And is there even something that can be done on like a school level, or Tempe for us actually goes into schools sometimes as well, right? To foster a different narrative. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm not as familiar with your school systems in Germany or Portugal.
Yeah.
The American school system has both public and private options, and then there's also a large homeschool community, like home education,
Yeah.
where people do school their kids at home.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
homeschool is not possible in Germany, but it's possible in Portugal, so that there are some
interesting.
differences. Yeah.
The reason why there's so much choice in the United States, both public, private, and home education, is I think there's a strong ethic of parents having a fundamental right to guide and direct the education of their children. It's kind of central to who we are, that
Yeah.
we will have a role in directing how our children learn and grow, and we don't need the state to tell us how to do that.
Yeah.
And again, that may just be our Americanness coming out, but we believe very strongly that we know best. The teachers are not the experts. I think that there are many amazing, incredible teachers. None of them will be a better father to my children than me. I know what's best. Now, in an ideal world, you'd have school systems that taught the essentials, and they did a great job on science and reading and math, and they were helping them with vocations. Unfortunately, what we have seen in the school system is a progression where, as families have broken down, society has looked and said, okay, this child needs help medically. This child needs 3 meals a day. This child's going to need help with choosing a school. And people, where they're going to go to college. And this kid's going to need help getting to school, going back. This kid's going to need some care between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. till his parents get off work. Well, as children's needs being unmet in the family have expanded, the schools have risen to meet that need with their programs and services. Now, you could say, well, that's honorable and heroic that the school has stepped up in this way. I would say that it's incredibly expensive to replace the family using the school. You have to hire so many nurses. You have to hire so many guidance counselors, bus drivers, extra cafeteria workers, teacher assistants, it's unbelievable. It takes so much money to replace the family. And so we've seen the school system expand, but also they've expanded the categories that they believe they're entitled to educate our children with too, to where they're getting into sexual education. They're beginning to talk about gender ideology and all of these things that, quite frankly, have nothing to do with academics, nothing to do with education. It's political, it's sexual, it's religious. And so we personally, speaking about my family, we've made the decision to put our kids into private schools that not only teach those academics, but if there is a need to counsel or to guide outside of academics, it's going to be done through a Christian worldview that shares our values. And that is incredibly important to us, that we know that the kids are all going to have issues, right? No matter what school you're in, private, public, even at home, you're going to have kids with challenges. But what the private schools do is especially when they're Christian, they align with your values. You can guarantee that the teachers, the positions of authority, are going to share my worldview and are going to enforce and hold similar rules and lines to myself, which right now, it's a mixed bag in the United States, whether that's going to happen through a public school. There are so many teachers who are using that as an opportunity to indoctrinate children into their ideology, going far outside the bounds of academics in education. And so I can't blame parents for saying, yeah, I don't want my kid in that. I don't want them picking up your ideology. I want you to just teach the basics. If you're not going to do that, then we're going to find an alternative.
Yeah. No, that's such a good point. I mean, for me personally, that would also probably be something that I would think of if I put myself in the situation. Picking a Christian school would be a great pick, because then I at least know that the worldview that they base themselves on should be aligning with my worldview, which is a good start, right? And I think you also made a great point there with something that I've seen in happening in Germany, where I grew up for 19 years until I moved out of Germany for the first time, was that all of those systems, truly, even starting at kindergarten, would take in the kids for the entire day. So from the morning till like late in the afternoon. So basically caregivers in those institutions took over the entire raising up of the children. So I think that is something that, first of all, that's also very expensive for the parent, because the parent in most of the countries has to pay for that as well, right? So that is already something that's not like, it doesn't necessarily match up. So maybe it's a good question also to ask ourselves, like, how much more do I actually earn if I maybe have a job that doesn't allow me to take care of my kid at all? So I think there's also something like a little gap that can be closed, and maybe something to consider, like, do I find another job where I can actually work from home, especially now that it's possible, so that I can take up more of the time with my children and not have to give them away for the biggest amount of the day. And yeah, just like these little things where we can kind of tweak how everything is set up. But I think when I actually was growing up and was in that age group, just a couple years after I went through kindergarten, it seemed to have been like the most popular thing to put your child in there for the longest amount of time. Yeah, you were having the complete freedom to do whatever you want to do, and even to use it for like shopping or whatsoever and
Mm-hmm.
just have your child out of the way. And I do think though that we are seeing a shift with that, and a shift in thought process around that, especially obviously in like a more Christian and traditional
Mm-hmm.
community, I would say. So that's great that we actually see a difference there.
I think, my issue is I never want any parent to feel like they don't have any option but to put their kid in
Yeah.
to that kind of school system for all day. You may choose, and that's fine. I think if that's, what's best for your family, you feel that way. I might disagree with that, but it is
Yeah.
your right to direct the education of your child how you want. What worries me is when, have we created an economy, both like you mentioned, through conspicuous consumption, this spending, 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 or through stagnant wages? Have we
Mm.
created an economy where parents are trapped into all day childcare because they don't have a better option? That they don't feel like they have an option. They don't feel like they can do anything but have their kid. They got to work all day.
Yeah.
That would be, I think that's the thing we gotta push away from is I want every parent to have the opportunity to be with their child, to work as much as they want, if that's what they choose. And again, a marriage does make that easier because you've got two people both, to share the load of work and childcare, raising of children. So
Yeah. Another question would be just in general about identity. I think that obviously that's something that for me personally has a very Christian point of view. I would say that when I look out into this world, that people are struggling with who they are. And I think that is something that we also struggle with. Yeah, just giving that onwards to whom we are raising up, right? Because it's all about kind of choosing who you want to become or who you want to be. Instead, this is now a very Christian perspective though, knowing that you actually have an identity, and for me personally that would be rooted in Christ, and Christ has set us apart and set us into a, I guess, into a position of like who he made us to be as men, as women, and he loves us the way that he has created us, and he doesn't see any fault in who he has made us to be. And yeah, just would love to hear thoughts. Is that something that you're also covering, and in a way, like how can we foster a healthy creation and building up of identity in children?
well, we do have a small group curriculum on our website. You can go to thembeforeus.com, and in the resources tab, we do have
Yeah.
a small group curriculum for churches that does walk people and church members, people with our shared worldview, through these issues. That breaks it down. That this is how, because there's just an inescapable truth here, that, and I do mean capital T truth. Like, this is a big issue that only you're just not going to find the answer to somewhere else. That God created male and female. He created the institution of marriage to protect children, and this has been very good for kids. We've seen that when we follow this design, kids are advantaged. They do very well, and so there's this element of like, yeah, we don't we when we stray from this, it doesn't go well. And so it's important that, again, we instill in couples, families, from a very early age, that this is God's design. It's good for you. It's meant for your protection, and it's okay to advocate for that. I know you're in a culture that doesn't value this. I know they're going to say that you're, bigoted, or that you're discriminatory for advocating for this. But I think that's where we have to keep going back to saying, you know um, this design is set up this way because it advantages children. They flourish when this design is held to. And we know from even looking at it, um, man, when the data, the statistics, when this design is adhered to, when people do get married and then raise their kids, they do better. They do better the rest of their life. They avoid things like incarceration, poverty. They get better scores on tests in school. They earn more over their lifetime. And so it's not discriminatory to hold to our worldview and beliefs. It's understanding that this is ancient wisdom that when held to is so much better for society and for kids, and we're gonna rigidly adhere to it because it is good for kids.
Yeah, it shows throughout the whole lifetime that it's an advantage to actually know who you are and go with that, and it really sets you and roots you in life and establishes a good trajectory, which is so good that this is actually, I mean, it's actually a fact, so you can't really argue with that, which is amazing. Obviously, men and women play a huge role, like adult men and women, in raising up children and standing up for children. But I think there is a very important role for men in particular, because I think that, especially with women, I don't know, I had a conversation about this a couple of times already, also on here, I do believe, at the point of where women came into a lot of those study fields and all the things and into higher positions in companies. Women very much, because they have way more of an emotional tendency, sometimes kind of stray away from facts and what is actually important, and from the path that could actually serve us in a better way, because they kind of want to include everything and everyone. And I do think there's a need and an importance for men stepping up, for men to be courageous. And I would love if you could share on that, what your thoughts are on the role of husbands, of fathers, of men who are seeking to be married and to raise children. Yeah, what the role of men is in that regard.
I think that God perfectly designed the balance
Yeah,
between genders. And I think when each is held in tension, we bring, not only to kids within a family, we bring them everything they need, from uh, the right amount of adventure with dad to the right amount of nurturing and care with mom. And while those can feel like stereotypes, they're stereotypical because the vast majority fall into those categories of both, risk taking and
yeah,
adventure, aggression versus nurturing and care and tenderness. And so I think even as you extend that outside the family, I think there are elements where where each gender, each person brings something that can help us to live in tension. Both, we had a storm here, and all the people working on our electrical power lines were men. And as
yeah,
my daughter saw them all working, she said, "Why aren't there any women? Why aren't there any girls specifically?" And we talked about the fact that, we actually looked it up. There's just like 200 something workers that are female on electrical lines in the United States out of tens of thousands. And so
yeah,
I said, God made us different. And because of that, there are not many girls that want to do work like that. That's scary and takes a lot of strength, and it's risk. I said, but on the other side, Savannah, my daughter's name, I said, when we went to visit mom at the hospital, and my wife's a nurse, I said, "Did you see many boys?" And she said, "No, there were a lot of girls that were nurses." I said, "Well, see, God made women differently too. They bring a whole different, uh, set of skills and ideas, and they care a lot more about people, and so they want to be in
yeah,
professions that work with people, not just high up in the cherry picker working on electrical lines." I said, "Now you can do either one, and we live in a place where you can, but you don't have to, and it's okay to say that, you know, you're more than likely going to do something that involves people because you're a girl and God made you different." And
yeah,
so I think we don't need to be so rigid that we say women belong in the home or men belong at work. I don't believe that. But I do think it's okay to acknowledge, well, our genders do predispose us to wanting and desiring pretty different things that most of society is going to adhere to very naturally.
yeah,
For example, when a mom has a baby, she's going to want to stay at home with her kid. That doesn't make her stereotypical or wrong. It's just a natural inclination, and we can honor that and support it. And if so again, I think we've got a balance between being so rigid and I don't want to tell Savannah she can never be an electrical worker, but you can say it's probably unlikely because of the way you're made. Biology is going to play a role in that. But if you want to, you certainly can. And by the way, that doesn't make you a boy either.
Yeah.
If you want to do something like that, that just makes you a woman who wants to work on electrical lines and take risks and have adventures. And that's
Yeah.
okay too. There's some
Yeah.
range here for you to express yourself that way.
I'm always an advocate for, I mean, I absolutely agree with we can choose whatever we want to choose because we live in a free world. So we actually, especially in Europe and the US, we are free to choose for the most part. And I also would never say like, okay, the mother has to stay at home and the father has to go to work, because as we said earlier, it doesn't always work like that anyways. And there are so many new models that have come up where we can actually work from home, or we can have a passion like podcasting or whatever it would be. And like so many moms like working through social media or having their own little businesses online, and you can do so many things, right? So even if you would prefer more like home-based life as a mother, you could still choose that and incorporating your creativity and a certain type of work into that life as well. So we have so many potential alleyways to go down with that. And I think that's great. I absolutely love that. I do think on the other hand though, it's so important to also always like foster that idea and that thought that just because we have like different roles, that doesn't mean that we are of different value, because I think that's like where the world is kind of going wrong. It's like we've attributed a value to a certain role. We've attributed that when you do work more like a man, all of a sudden it is of more value. And this is something that I feel like we've kind of done upon ourselves. It's like women are trying to get into those positions that they think are more valuable, even though their hearts may be saying something different. It's like, actually, I want to work with people, but being a nurse is less valuable. That's like a thought process, just for an example, as being a worker on an electrical line, right? So I think that is just something so important that we teach that to children, especially, that whatever they're choosing, because like their heart desires that and they feel like that is actually in alignment with who they are and what they've been made for. And be that as a woman picking to become an electrical worker, if that is you, that do it. But if you feel like you actually want to be in a more nurturing position, it doesn't make you any less valuable. I think that's something so important to always focus on, because I feel like when I was in the position of like, just from personal experience of choosing my career, the only thing that I heard, and I actually had to, how do you say that, unravel or unfold that at a later point in life, the only thing I heard was you need to be like a sort of CEO position, in a CEO position at a company, you need to make it. And it was always in a sort of either corporate or startup environment, but you really need to rise up the ranks in order to be worth something. That was obviously a very particular narrative, but I feel like a lot of people that I've been then going to university with and doing my bachelor's and my master's with had sort of were on the same trajectory, only to at one point, actually for me personally, I mean, I know I probably was supposed to go that way because it taught me things, obviously, and I don't think that anything that we ever experience is necessarily something that we need to erase. It's always part of our life. But still, it made me go through a whole process where I was like, oh, actually, that's not in alignment with how I work as a woman at all. I actually need way more flexibility, and I need to be able to make my own hours and all the things. And that doesn't mean that I gave up completely the things that I am good at, but I just need to find a different way a different system to work in that makes it possible for me as a woman to just to feel healthy, honestly, and to feel well nourished. And I think that's something that sometimes we kind of neglect and forget about.
Well, I do think that, like we said, if there's a desire to be an electrical worker, for that
Yeah.
example, there should be an opportunity to do that. But also, I think the greatest expression of our equality can't be our sameness. So the greatest expression of our equality can't be that every a female has to work in male oriented or like a job like an electrical worker. We could also take the approach that, why wouldn't we, express just how equal we are by venerating and celebrating the choice to stay home and raise kids too? Why
Yeah.
can't that why can't the equality come from society equally valuing that choice like the choice to work? But that's not been the case. The cultural
Yeah.
narrative has been, you will be equal. We need to get you the opportunity to work so that you can be equally celebrated, instead of saying the embrace of of being a homemaker, to stay home, to home educate your kids, that can be an equally positive, good contribution to society, just like entering the labor force.
Yeah.
So again, I think that it's a perspective that's just missing right now. It is
Yeah.
not valued, it's not venerated, it's not held up. And as a result, we do have a lot of people going to the labor force to seek that validation, because
Yeah.
I need to be seen as equal and I've gotten this opportunity. Well, I think, well, could we orient our economies and our societies and our communities in such a way that the choice to stay home is thought of as an equal, an equal of equal value and of equal contribution to society, and deserving of the same level of praise and adulation. And I don't
Yeah.
think it is right now.
Yeah. That's a beautiful goal or trajectory to work towards, because I think that would serve us well for sure, to have that as something to, yeah, to work towards really, and to communicate that to the next generation so that they, because the other thing is actually not truly having a choice. We're communicating it as like having a choice, but we don't really make it one. So I think that would be actually really beautiful to have an actual choice, right? And to know that whatever you're choosing, it doesn't change who you are, it doesn't change your value, and you can truly, you can truly make a choice, and not just one that's kind of faked in a way, because it's not a true one. Yeah. So that's good. I would love, just as one of the last questions, what can we as individuals do to maybe, I don't know, to educate people, to educate our community, and to also, if conversations come up where a topic arises that we feel like, okay, it would be necessary to speak up about this, how can we bring up those important topics, especially also around the child's birth and children being of such importance, and focusing on children, and making them our priority? How can we approach those topics in day-to-day life, and have a good conversation about that without coming across narrow-minded or judgmental in the world's perspective?
Well, I think, everything we do at Them Before Us is oriented towards putting the child first in all of these questions. And
Yeah.
so, I think getting married, having kids, if that's what you feel called to do, certainly the community and society, the world needs that. We need parents. And then
Yeah.
as you're going down that pathway, always considering what's best for the child. And I think this extends even outside of the family, to say, in our local governments, are we choosing what is expedient now instead of what's best for the next generation of kids? Are we adding, billions of dollars to the national debt instead of making hard choices right now to set our kids up for something better? I think taking this ethic of what will be best for the kids, and then making the adults do the hard things, making the adults the ones to save, to work hard, to work through conflict and stay together in marriage, to continue to provide that stable environment kids need to flourish. I think understanding that is critical and foundational to everything we do in society is important. Having
Yeah.
lots of kids, important. Raising those kids, staying married, it's important. And so I think, first off, us as Christians, as individuals who love our countries and want our communities to flourish, being very pro those things is a great first step. And
Yeah.
then as we move into more complicated issues around, adoption, foster care, technologies like surrogacy, IVF, it's it's just important, even as the questions change, to always bring back the one filter. Who is being asked to sacrifice in this situation? Who is going to lose their mother in this situation, their father in this situation, sometimes their life in this situation? And then always putting it back on the adults to intervene and do the hard thing so that kids aren't asked to sacrifice.
Yeah, that's so good. As my very last question that I ask everyone on here is there one thing that you wish more humans would know about, something that just touches you deeply? Can be related to everything that we talked about, but can also be outside of that.
Well, definitely a deep question. I wish every person at least once in their life would experience what we would call the paradox of the gospel, that it's in losing your life that you gain it. I
Yeah.
think we experience this in very small ways. I went for a run this morning after a very late night because I knew that the short-term sacrifice would be better and I would feel the long-term gain of it, that I would feel better the rest of the day. In the same way, kids raising a family, it is a short-term sacrifice. You spend a whole year and a half with a child, pouring out your heart and soul, your time. You don't sleep, your money, you feed. I mean, it's hard, but there's so much good and purpose that it returns to you. In the same way, when you're forgiving one of your best friends and they've done something to really wrong you, and you're sitting there, and I've heard someone say it's like, holding a hot coal and hoping your friend gets burned. Like, that's anger and bitterness in
Yeah.
our hearts. And the gospel says when you lose, yourself, when you lose your life, you do gain it. It's when you lose the right to be angry at them, you put it down, you forgive them, that you actually feel way better, and the reconciliation is way worth it. But the lie at the beginning is that your anger and your frustration will be worth it, and it's never
Mm.
worth it. Just like sleeping in and not running would not have been worth it. Just like, choosing not to have kids because it would be too hard would not be worth it. And so I do wish people would understand, at least experience that one time in their life, how that delayed gratification, that sacrifice for the greater good or thing, is worth it. And I think our society would be better if people did get a taste of that
Yeah.
loss of their life to gain it in the end.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's such a good end to this conversation. As I mean, I love Jesus, and I can only so agree with that. That's beautiful and so well put. And the very, very, very last question is, where can people find them before us and all the great resources that you've talked about before?
Yep. So you can buy our books on Amazon. We have a new one, Pro Child Politics. You can get that one, like I said, on Amazon. You can go to thembeforeus.com. We are in the middle of the end of year, which here in the United States is when everyone raises all their money. We ask for people to support us, so you can certainly do that. Click
Amazing.
donate, help us, and we will continue to go around the world defending kids.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. It's incredible. I think it's very much needed, like we just talked about in this conversation. Thank you so much for also taking your time out of your day and talking to me and to, for everyone else on the Mood Lab being able to listen to this conversation. Thank you.
So grateful. Thank you.